Welcome to Making It Work, Job Descriptions for Library Spaces. This is part of a series of open conversations organized by Jeannie Narum and the Learning Spaces Collaboratory, or LSC. An interdisciplinary group, and by that I mean architects, planners, provosts, faculty members, and a couple of librarians have been meeting during the pandemic under the auspices of the LSC. We've had many really stimulating conversations about current and future learning spaces. This series is based on both the ideas and the format of those meetings. This is the 6th conversation in the series and will be recorded. Recordings of previous sessions are available through the LSC website and will be included in the LSC Library of Evidence. I'm Joan Lippincott, the Associate Executive Director Emerita of the Coalition for Networked Information, or CNI. I've been collaborating with LSC for many years, and in 2018, CNI and LSC held a joint workshop, a roundtable that focused on designing job descriptions for library spaces, including innovation zones, entry spaces, staff spaces, quiet spaces, and consultation spaces. The report of that meeting and additional resources are linked in the announcement of this conversation. You'll see the opening of the report on your screen now. Now, what do we mean by a job description for a library? Here's an example of how we might approach the concept of job description for a library space. The University of Rochester Library's iZones mission is to be a creative problem-solving space, a program and community designed to empower students to explore and imagine ideas for social, cultural, community, and economic impact. In order to achieve those goals, a variety of spaces are needed for different activities. And importantly, a program guided by staff needs to evolve in response to the community's needs. And here you can see on the right of the screen just one of the types of spaces in the iZone. And here's a screen capture of just a portion of the kinds of programs they've held. My favorite is Screw Up Night. There's an increasing interest in understanding how libraries can promote a sense of community and belonging on campus, and in particular, embody the ideals of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need more studies to understand the characteristics of spaces that feel welcoming to various subgroups of students. For example, if the job description of the commons space in the renovated Odegaard Library at University of Washington includes providing a welcoming environment, how would we go about writing the job description for the space? And how would we assess whether the space achieved that goal? We have a great group of speakers and facilitators for our conversation today. Joseph Lucia is Dean of Libraries at Temple University, and under his leadership in 2019, the university completed construction and began operation of the world-class Charles Library, notable for its unique design by architects Snøhetta and local partners Stantec. In addition to his professional work, he's an active amateur musician with a current solo project called Sounds from Upstairs. Henry Myerberg is principal and founder of the New York-based architectural design firm HMA2. His firm has completed numerous college and university mixed-use projects ranging from libraries to entire campuses, including at the American University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan. His firm has also designed public and school libraries. Damecia Donahue is a librarian at Wayne State University, and better known there as the overlord of the Tech Bunker and the Tech Vault, two creative spaces in the library. She is an advocate for social justice and works to include the local community in activities and programs at Wayne State. While each of these individuals will present some thoughts, we want to hear from you. We will monitor the chat and have Q&A after each speaker, and hopefully we'll have ample time for some open discussion later. But let's start off with Joe Lucia. Joe, please start your screen share. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan and Jeannie, for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to sort of take a slightly different angle on this, because the challenge to me in this conversation is we have a whole new building, and we needed to face a large question in thinking through the job of that building. So I'm going to kind of gesture in the direction of the job of a total 21st century library environment as it's conceived from scratch in the current moment. Knowing that I'm excluding from this presentation many distinctive spaces that would be worth a conversation in this context, so that I can really focus on some of the overarching ideas that shaped the design and the experiential character of the Charles Library. And I would say three touchstone words are words that in some ways Joan already pointed to, which is the building at its core is conceived as a space, as a setting, as a facility designed to inspire, engage, and connect our community in various dimensions. And at the very end of this, I will summarize that in what I think of as a one-sentence job description. But one of the critical aspects of our conversation in the design process was to think about the library as a uniquely aspirational and inspirational building. And that embedded in that aspirational and inspirational building is what we came to discuss as a diverse ecosystem of spaces embedded with metaphors for learning, exploration, and community engagement. The building features many distinctive spaces, including a student success center, a special collections reading room that's open to the public, event space, exhibit space, 4 instructional spaces, a high density robotic storage system. I'm not going to look at any of those today. What I'm going to look at is this characteristic of the library as an inspirational setting for a learning journey. One of the overarching ideas for the experience of entering this building was to create a sense of warmth and welcome. And that's captured in the materiality of the lobby, which is clad in this amazing white cedar that is in the evening uplit from below, and is characterized this amazing curvilinear geometry that honestly is almost womb-like in certain contexts as you enter the space. So the notion of welcome and engagement is built into the design fabric of the structure. Another aspect of the building that is connected to this notion of inspiration and aspiration is the way some of the key spaces in the building are intended to lift spirits through their striking and unique design elements. And this is a look down into the main lobby area from the central staircase. And again, this is a look from above that lobby at the Oculus window down in and into the main entry space. The idea is that here is that there's both a setting for connection and conversation and private contemplation. And you'll see that throughout the building, this notion of the building as a setting both for connectedness and for individual work. Another aspect of the building that is distinctive is that there's a commitment throughout to a kind of ethos of visibility. There's a high level of transparency throughout the building. And this is a seating area right in front of that main entry, the glass wall. And one of the things I like to say about this is that, you know, there's many contexts in the building that are intended to support the idea of working alone together, this idea of being in a setting where you can do your personal work in the company of others and also be visible in that engagement. But the building also supports active spaces, spaces that are about communication, conversation, connectedness, and interactive work. And this is one of those spaces. This is the 24/7 study area with a view back into the main lobby. Like any library, this building also, as a library, embodies a range of reading spaces. So there are multiple what you would consider formal and informal reading rooms throughout the building. And this is one thing I want to say about this particular location is that it now has on that upper left-hand wall, which is a large white expanse, a mural that was commissioned from a local Philadelphia muralist and executed in collaboration with the architect. So if you come to the building, you'll see this extraordinarily colorful mural on that left wall. It's an abstract mural that pulls in the colors of the sky. You know, because of the windows, you can often see the blue sky and the clouds. So it's another example of an inspirational space. There are other kind of reading areas that are a little less formal. This is adjacent to what will eventually be a public terrace once the safety barrier is complete, and our green roof on the 4th floor. And then, you know, finally, this is a private reading area in our graduate student study space. As any contemporary library, and this photo is a little aged, was taken when we opened the building, so all the technology was not in place, but this is a view into our Scholar Studio, which is our engagement space for digital scholarship. It includes a virtual reality room, breakout rooms, a media lab. One design element I want to point out here is very deliberately, this was left open and industrial to create a sense of it being a workshop. Part of this space is our, again, this was an early photograph. There's a lot more equipment in here now. This is our maker space, which has, I think now 25 different production printers and a prototyping space and a whole bunch of other equipment. But the reason I put it here is not just because it's a maker space, but because we gave it one of the most distinctive locations in the building, carrying forward this theme of inspiration. So this is at the southeast corner with 2 large windows that overlook the intersection of the 2 main thoroughfares through the campus. So the makerspace is not tucked away in a basement. It's in a highly visible, light-flooded area that it embeds this notion of inspiration and engagement. But one of the key aspects of the building is this notion of a vertical journey that you take from that lobby up through. You can do it by elevator, and the building is fully ADA compliant, but you can also journey by stair up through to the 4th floor, which is a floor that is distinctive in the building in that it is entirely clad in glass at the exterior. And this is the location you arrive at to discover the traditional book stacks, which line the core of this floor, which are surrounded by these reading niches, these private study rooms, and other study areas. And you know, one of the undergirding principles for this is that you have the traditional experience of an academic library encountering the stacks and that massive accumulation of knowledge in a design environment that is distinctively contemporary, that softens the urban landscape by having these reading areas that are adjacent in many places to the green roofs, so that brings in both natural light and vegetation, again carrying forward that notion of inspiration and aspiration, and that culminates at the south end in a very traditional quiet reading room. So the library embodies this journey you know, through various spaces to this light flooded 4th floor, which also at night is illuminated with uplighting and lights in the wood-clad ceiling. So it kind of glows from the exterior as a kind of an indicator of this unique function. And so what I'm going to close with is just a way of stating that, you know, this concept of the Charles Library, with many distinctive spaces, all of which are worth conversation, really envisions the library as a setting for a learning journey with a series of distinctive destinations that support different kinds of works engaged by our students and faculty. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Joe. I think probably everyone on the conversation today can't wait to come and visit. And we are looking forward to seeing it, the beautiful Charles Library, at the next Designing Libraries Conference. Shelley is asking, now that the building has been open, albeit during COVID, any, quote, other duties as assigned, close quote, that have been added to that job description for the building?
Well, I'll say this. Last year, on a temporary basis, when we initially attempted to operate in-person instruction socially distanced, that created a classroom space crisis. And we had to temporarily convert 4 spaces in the building into instructional spaces. That lasted about 2 weeks, and then we removed from campus again. And those spaces have all been now converted back to their original intended use, and we are planning to operate the building as designed when we resume the semester next week. It's we had to pull almost 1,000 seats out of the building for social distancing purposes when we reconfigured for pandemic public health purposes, but all that seating is being restored.
And will that continue into this fall semester, Joe?
No, we are not doing socially distanced instruction at Temple. We have a mask mandate,
okay,
a vaccination requirement, and we're using a regular classroom inventory.
Thank you. Please add your questions to the chat. I have a question for you, Joe. It may be a difficult one to answer, but we hear about some students, let's say in some cases, first generation college students, who are very intimidated by grand university library buildings. And what do you think is the difference between, say, an old style formal building with high ceilings and maybe an atrium and beautiful furniture and things like that from the Charles Library? Do you feel that some students would be overwhelmed by what I would call the grandeur, and I mean that in a very positive way? What do you think about that?
That is a really fascinating question, and actually one we discussed a fair bit during design.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the one thing that is different is that there's a quirkiness to this building and an approachability to it. There's, you can't really see from these slides, but there's a tremendous kind of transparency that you see through the building as you come from either the east or the west sides. There's an informality to the furniture in the building that I think is more welcoming. And there's, I think one of the things that can be intimidating about traditional academic libraries is that collegiate Gothic churchiness, which is not present here. Yeah. In addition, there's a kind of a commitment to humble materials in the building. So the floors are polished concrete. Many of them are cracked. It does not have the feeling of a rich high-end hotel. It has the feeling of a usable space, in spite of its incredibly, one could say somewhat opulent design features. But again, the architects talked a lot about the notion that these are very humane materials. The wood and the concrete, they don't feel, they don't communicate a sense that this is a place for rich people or privileged people. They say this is a distinctive space that's kind of interesting to come into.
Thank you.
Let me interrupt here. This is Jeannie. Joe, do they call it Charles?
Yes, they call it Charles.
And we have a comment from Kevin. We're working with Snowhetta on the design of the new library in Charlotte, and Charles Library is often referenced in discussions with the new owner group in Charlotte, and it's great to see the building in use. Yes, it sure is. We're going to go on to Henry Myerberg and think of any other questions or discussion topics you want to have with Joe, because we'll have time later this afternoon. But Henry, over to you. And as Henry speaks, if you'd like to have ask Henry any questions, please write them in the chat.
Thank you, Joan. And I was just fascinated learning and seeing more about the Charles Library. It really is beautiful. And I think you're right. You can put your feet up there. And I think that's a real good attribute. quality that makes it feel welcoming, and the light, the air that's there. Anyway, and I think this idea of it being aspirational and inspirational is important. And these kinds of job descriptions, I thought this is a really fun description, by the way, Joan and Jeannie, and I actually shared with some of the library folk clients that we're working with. I think this is going to catch on. I think this is a great way to personify and make human, I think, these kinds of spaces. So there's just some kind of like batted around here, with some of our colleagues, what are job descriptions for spaces in the library, and kind of seeing like, okay, well, teacher, an event planner, community organizer, cook, counselor, entrepreneur, and all the above and more. And I think that's what it is that if you can think of a job description, then that's what a library can have, because the idea is that there is nothing the library can't do. And so one of the projects that we've been involved with, and Joan, thanks for mentioning, is the American University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan. This was doing a campus from the ground up. And the main building was actually the entire academic facility, offices, gymnasium, classrooms, teaching spaces, you name it. And the library was part of it. And it was conceived, the entire building was conceived as if it was one giant library. So the idea is the library is the campus. And these actually grand stairs actually lead to the second floor, which is actually the introduction to the library. But the idea is the library permeates the entire building. And so the personality of the library and the personality of the job description is it's a community organizer in this particular way. But the idea is a community organizer, but it also maybe not has other jobs. And it's like, it's a big community organizer. So bringing together, large groups of people. And the idea is that it can feel okay with 100, it can feel okay with 500. It can also be an event organizer for other kinds of events that aren't actually sponsored or even by the universities. Here's an outside group able to use the facility for their own purposes. And even a fashion show. And so the idea is that there is no job description. If you're an event planner, you have to plan for whatever events the community wants. And the same thing happened actually this is in Westport, Connecticut. This is a public library. And here in the central space, converted space that was there into this large reading room, workroom during the day. But that doesn't mean it's the only thing it can be. And there's these grandstands in the background here, which is actually like a newsstand. So that's where the periodicals are kept. But again, boy, it's also another place for a fashion show. I don't know how this has been happening. We didn't program any of this. And but it's also a place where you can get mobs of people in there together for events and readings and talks. And even it can be converted. This is actually like a place to sit and eat. So this was like a catered affair, an event that happened there, or even a rock show. And so the idea is that if the community can imagine what the space can be used for, then that's the personality, that's the job description, to be flexible. And even in Westport, they have this, one of the traditions is doing crossword puzzles, and they do it all together in a group. So actually then it's a big game room. But the bottom line is job description. I think everyone's job description this day, no one has one job description, okay? We're all wearing multiple hats. That's it.
We sure are. You've given me a new example to use in some of my presentations and writings, and that's the fashion show. I had not heard of libraries having fashion shows before, but one of the things that I've talked about a lot is libraries making better connections to content. And so a fashion show is one way to tie content. So books about fashion, books about periods in different countries or different history, films that have interesting costumes or costumes of a particular era. All of this content ties into the development of fashion. Then there are the maker spaces, and Damecia will talk a little bit about hers, and Joe mentioned his maker space. I don't know if at Temple they've got sewing machines as part of their maker space, but I know we have someone from University of Texas, Austin that do, and who may have sewing machines in their maker space as well. So you could tie all of this together, the equipment, the content, the resources to inspire and to give historical perspective or design perspective, and then the event space. So that's very intriguing. And Lorraine mentions, yes, they do have sewing machines in their maker space at UT Austin, and Joe does as well. And Caden says that he loves the, or he or she, I'm sorry, loves the idea of the library being the campus and that it's all integrated. When I first studied librarianship, there was kind of a theme called the Library College. And so it reminds me a little bit of that. Any questions for Henry? And Lorraine's commenting, they also have a recording studio for musicians in Austin, a big music city, and a number of libraries. One of the interesting things to me is that libraries have had listening collections for many years and viewing collections of videos, but now they have spaces where you create that content, not just receive or passively view or listen to that content.
Yeah. And Joan, just to add a little bit, to that, at the Westport Library, they do have a sound recording and video production studios. And part of the idea is there's training. So for the events that actually are sponsored by the library or even outside groups, students are then brought into the library and are learning how to use the equipment, are involved in the production. So people are learning how to produce content and produce these events at the same time. So it's actually a teaching place and as well. So it's not just
Absolutely.
presentation. There are people
Right.
behind the scenes learning and working the systems.
And that's because there's staff expertise available and someone thinking through developing a program, an
Exactly.
education.
And but also bringing other outside resources
Yes.
in. It's not just the
Yes.
staff. It's actually,
Right.
this is a resource for the community, a community
Right.
of professionals, a community of students. And so the library is sort of is the surrogate holder of this thing. It's not the sort of keeper of it.
Yes,
It's
that's
the
a great distinction. Safdar says that libraries become community enabling campus places because they are free from departmental definitions or constraints. Very true. And Shannon, welcome. Her question is, if the library is the campus and the campus is the library, how do we keep from returning to the distributed library system and from students creating self-silos? Very interesting.
Interesting question. I know in that particular environment, the students feel like they own the place. And so it's organically silo-less. Even the faculty don't have offices there. And so the idea of where you actually meet, like one of the challenges was people wanted to have quiet places to meet. That was before the building was built, or just a place to meet students. And then the idea is that faculty say, well, actually, there's so much buzz going on, we can meet in the open space and have a private conversation.
And Jimmy says the library as a platform for content generation is a great concept. I agree with that.
It's all of the rubric, though, it's a teaching place.
Yes.
So that whatever's going on, learning is the outcome.
Thanks so much, Henry.
Thank you.
Damecia, over to you. Please remember to, thanks for unmuting, and go ahead and share your screen.
I'll talk about some similar concepts, but it will be on a smaller scale. So in our undergraduate library on the second floor, we have an area that's called the Collaboration Commons. And so what I did, I pitched this idea to leadership, and I was able to get two of the larger study rooms that we had up in the Collaboration Commons and sort of turn them into these inviting environments where students, faculty, staff, the community can come in and sort of explore different ideas, different ways of thinking. There's technology involved, but most of the time what ends up happening is that the technology actually becomes secondary. So I think part of the job description would basically be other duties as assigned, right? So the space is whatever people want to make it. Whatever someone wants to come in and do and talk about and discuss or build or dream or discover, develop, whatever the case may be, we try and provide as much room and opportunity for them to do so. So the idea behind it is to really explore the individual and get at sort of what they feel is visionary for them. So one of the ways that the space is used is kind of as a community incubator. So we do a lot of work with K through 12 students. We do a lot of work with local technology experts in the area. Pretty much anyone who comes in, like I said, we sit down, we have a conversation, kind of do a good old traditional reference interview, but it involves technology and sort of some ideas related to concepts that they want to create or explore. So these are just a few images of some of the student-led initiatives and programs that we've been able to do. So the students are always interested in coming up with different ways to engage each other, engage the community, and also to work with me so that we can figure out different ways that the library can become more of a space for everyone who comes inside of it. This is an example of a group of students who started coming into the space. They were avid gamers. So we got together and I became their advisor, and they created an esports student organization. So these are just some images of some of the different tournaments that we did. We did a lot of different activities for probably about 1.5 to 2 years. One of the last ones, luckily in March of 2020, we were able to put on a gaming and anime convention. We had over 400 people show up. So again, we have the space in the library, the tech bunker and the tech vault that we use, but we also explore other parts of campus. We do a lot of things outside of the space. So we also want people to know that not only do we have these 2 spaces available for you, but the rest of the library and other parts of campus are also available to you to do sort of exploratory events. And so as a result of the esports group being started, we were also able to collaborate with CNIT, our Dean of Students office. We're working with athletics a little bit, but we were able to get the campus leadership on board with creating an actual esports lab. So we've now been able to launch that. It opened in last September. So the picture in the top left corner is sort of what it looked like when we first opened it. So of course, it was during a pandemic, so there weren't very many people in there at the time. But it's starting to grow more and more. And then these other images are some of the images from the convention that we put on in March. Another way that the space is used in other parts of the library involves this concept of the future of work. So the image with the lights is something called a light aid. So a student came in and he has a niece that has visual impairments, right? So he wanted to create something for her to be able to learn and use. And so we 3D printed this item. We found some light bulbs laying around. He brought some in. I searched around in the library. We found some resources and some tools that he could use. And we actually built several prototypes. And so those are actually being used within the community of schools that his niece attends for other students that have different impairments. And then the picture next to that, so a lot of the times when students come into the space, they end up collaborating with each other, not necessarily coming in to do so, but it just kind of organically happens. So the student sitting is Joan and the student standing is Jacob. And so this is one of my favorite stories. I stay in contact with them. So Joan had come into the space and he created a game called Beast Mode On. It's available on Steam. He made a soundtrack for it. We practiced it. We had people come in and try things out. Someone at Ford actually found his game on Steam and they offered him a job. So as a result of him coming into the space and finding the space and finding collaborators, he was able to create something and make, you know, a career out of it. And then Jacob, always kind of a fan of the space, and he's like, he's a communication student, and he had a final project coming up where he wanted to make a video of something that represented what Wayne State is, the types of things that we do. We're very innovative. We like to think outside of the box. So I introduced the two of them. They did an interview, they recorded it. It went, you know, it spread on social media, and Jacob ended up getting offered a job at Wayne State in the marketing and communications department. So the idea behind the space is, like I said, it's kind of like anything goes. Whatever comes in the door, I'm prepared for some things. I'm totally not prepared for others, but that's the nature of the space. And that's the nature of the work that I do. And that's it for my slides.
So Damecia, that's one of my favorite stories that you've told, and I asked you to do that today because I think it deserves a really wide audience. And I'm sure that people listening today are quite aware that you're the spark in the space. And again, it's not the facility alone, it's not the technology alone. It's really important to create an environment, to have staff there that facilitates the connections and has the expertise and has the ingenuity to go find those light bulbs and tools all over the library. And you know, that's what makes it happen. So thank you. And Safdar says heartwarming stories, Damecia, and I agree. So
Just wanted to add, I think these are, I mean, what you have demonstrated with the space and the tools and yourself is how the library is a one-on-one place. It's not just a group place, but the fact that you are, you know, a job counselor and a facilitator on so many, you know, interesting levels. And I mean, you're defining the role of librarian, I think, in a really, really interesting way. And I think, and like you say, and in a way, the space has a certain modesty, you know, and a kind of like, come in here and you can do what you want. And I think that's also what was nice, I think, about the Charles Library. It had the feeling like it's not a precious place, it's not a museum, you know, and you can mess around with it. And so I think this is really, I mean, also an inspiring piece of work. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I really try and spend a lot of time with people one-on-one or in small groups, just so we can kind of have a conversation, because a lot of the technology that we have, although there isn't a lot of it, people have never been exposed to it before. So it turns into, like, you know, the technology will work for you whatever way you need it to work for you, right? Whatever way you approach it is the way that you can make it work for you. So we have a lot of interesting conversations about things pretty much on a daily basis. So it's really fun.
Yeah, and you've also seemed to break the barrier between, you know, the campus is this sort of cloister, it's its own place. In other words, but you're reaching out and kind of, you know, breaking that barrier between town and gown, so, and make the feeling of inclusion, so that the community now feels like they're part of Wayne State. I mean, I think that's really a remarkable and important step, and how the library is really is the thing that can show the rest of the university how to do things like that.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of very small children say to me, "I want to be a librarian," and I'm like, yes, yes. Please do. So that's really rewarding too.
And probably also some of them are thinking, I'd like to come to Wayne State to university.
Yep, absolutely.
Important thing too.
Yep.
Well, our challenge in the Charles Library is we opened in August of 2019 and operated for 8 months, and then had the pandemic shut us down. Now, actually, in this meeting or in this session is Nancy Turner, who runs our assessment and self-study work in the library, and we had done some early user interviews and some investigation of the preliminary experiences of our community with our spaces, with the intention of, having a kind of continuous loop learning process around how the building functions, but that got interrupted. When we get back, I think our challenge now is we're just not sure what world we're entering into. We're going to have a mask mandate. We're going to have all of these public health concerns through this semester. So this will not be a normal year either. And we need to figure out what the path is towards the future life of the building in a post-pandemic world where the kinds of assumptions that drove the pandemic did not shape our thinking. And I'll just be candid that that's just something we're, all kind of going to have to deal with. I believe the great building will be a great building and will re-engage its community, but it's going to take some time. But I did want to ask Damecia a question, which is, I'm pretty sure Wayne State's like Temple, and it's fairly large in terms of the student body and a lot of the things you're offering. And I raise this question because we get this criticism or this issue raised for us is a lot of the things that you're doing are focused on probably a very small subset of your population, but it's very important work, right? So how do you balance, and this is a conversation we actually have at my management table, these things that require a lot of effort and personal engagement to hit small populations while you have tens of thousands of students who might not be able to avail themselves at scale of these kinds of things. And what's your thought about that? Because I just feel like that's a dilemma we face in our settings where we are making different kinds of investment decisions. And some of them are really important, but they hit a very small population.
Yeah, so I think part of the answer to that is that we partner with other communities throughout Wayne State that are doing lots of different things, right? So Wayne State is very community oriented. There's a lot of outreach that happens. So I think location wise, we're very lucky. We're very centrally located in Midtown, and there's access to a lot of different types of people. So we usually have opportunities where we are able to reach out a little bit further. It doesn't happen as much as I would probably like it to happen. But I'll also say though, as more people start to find out about the space and what we're doing, and the students are talking about it more, we seem to be reaching like wider audiences that wouldn't necessarily, let's say, think about the libraries in the first place. So the reason that they're coming in is for something else. So it's kind of like I don't know, it's tricky because there's not one catch-all for everything that people want to do, right? So that's kind of why we just go with the flow, and whatever happens, happens. And I think word of mouth, even though it's, we're very, people are really into social media, but people coming in and experiencing things seems to help with that as well. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's not a question that had an answer. It's a question,
Yeah.
I just was curious about how you think about it.
Yeah, it's something to think through and think about. Yeah.
I'd like to open up the discussion to everyone, but first I'd like to start with two comments that are in the chat. And if you would like, first Safdar and then Lorraine, you could read your comment and expand on it a little bit and get the discussion going.
I was struck by Damecia's story, which was heartwarming, and it was an emotional outcome from a space. And so it drove me, and I in working with clients, many times I do probe them about if there was a script of behavior that the space should achieve, what would that be? Because our clients, and many times we don't associate space with psychology and behavior as much as we should. And it can position space design much more in the middle of achieving certain outcomes, not just in learning spaces, but in cultural spaces on campuses where, sense of togetherness, sense of belonging, sense of coming together can be achieved through material choices, through scale, through furniture provision, all of those can be looked at more as cultural outcomes of a space.
Anyone like to respond to that? I think that's a very interesting way of looking, and Shelley says that's great, great idea.
Yeah.
Lorraine, do you like to read your comment and expand on it if you'd like? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Joan. I was thinking about our own space here in the College of Fine Arts Library, where we have a makerspace, and the student who designed a 6-string instrument, which he couldn't buy because he couldn't afford it at the time, didn't come into library with that in mind, came to look for a piece of music which required the 6-string violin, and then saw the makerspace and was inspired by seeing the space in close proximity to the materials he was looking for, and then proceeded to work with other students to design that 6-string violin, which you may have seen, it went viral very quickly. That's what I meant with proximity of, space of inspiration. But at Dartmouth, I'm not sure if those of you who watch Shark Tank, or is that what it's called, that program on TV? A student at Dartmouth, where they have an entrepreneurial space inside the library, also developed something for electrical cars, and went to Shark Tank and found money to invest in it, and has his business now as a result of doing that in library space. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Lorraine. That's a great example, 2 great examples. Who else would like? Shannon, I know you mentioned this in a previous conversation, but I'd really like this, the participants today, to be aware of the work that you're doing with SCUP. Could you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. And I actually thought about that because for the last year, I've been doing a fellowship with SCUP, and my fellowship has revolved around the question of planning and designing for diverse, equitable, and inclusive campus environments. And I did a lot of research with students over the last year, and the place that students said they felt most comfortable on campus was the library. And so I've thought about that a lot during this conversation. And I think it's really because that's the one place that's neutral, and that students have a choice in how they utilize the furniture, how they utilize the space. And so I was actually just typing a question. As a post-pandemic campus, we have decided that the reason people come back are going to return to campuses for connections and these sort of impromptu networking moments. The library has reinvented itself already over the last decade, from a place for books to a place for people. So I feel like that lesson, the lesson that the library has learned over the last decade, could help inform how we look at the entire campus post-pandemic. So I'm curious, those of you that work with libraries a lot, like, what advice would you give the rest of us in terms of how to program other spaces on campus post-pandemic?
So Joe and Damecia, if you'd like to respond, please go ahead, but I'd like to open this up to anyone who's participating. Just remember to unmute, and hopefully everyone doesn't speak all at once, but give it a try. I can't see everyone on the screen at once, so I don't know if you raise your hand, I might not catch it. So please just jump in.
I'll just make a couple quick thoughts. I think one of the things about the Charles Library is there are certain aspects of some of the spaces that are sort of blank slates. They can be potentially used in a number of different ways, and that goes to this idea of students having choices about how and where they want to work and what they want to do, and not having a preconceived function imposed on the space. I don't know how you do that in other spaces the same way. The library has a lot of privileges around meeting to, as came up earlier, to very consciously suit a diversity of purposes. So we get some freedom around how our spaces work. And maybe that can be a principle. Yeah, but I just want to, I think this whole question about engagement and contact is going to be a challenge. And I'll say, you know, the other aspect of it is that, you know, our library workforce is not 100% on site anymore. And so this whole notion of how the library is a connector when people are working in different contexts and not always together is one I'm thinking a lot about.
Damecia?
Okay.
Yeah, a couple comments about a few earlier statements. So the idea of culture. So with the gaming and anime convention that we held, so the students did they did workshops and they did presentations, and the bulk of that was about inclusivity. It was about gaming culture. It was about comments that are often sometimes made in playing games. So they're very aware of their environments and sort of what happens and how they engage with each other. So that was really great to see. Like, I didn't help them come up with content or anything like that. So they're very, once you get them talking about things and asking them questions, they will generally go down a path where they're becoming more self-aware, right? So I would say that if you're able to set up environments where the students are able to talk to each other and there's someone there to kind of help guide conversations, they will usually come up with things that they want on their own. And then it becomes a little bit easier to facilitate those things, like during all this remote work. I had several students reach out to me who wanted to do virtual workshops, right? So they want to do something on like audio, visual stuff, whatever the case may be. I think it's a matter of them feeling that they have a connection to somebody on a campus or somewhere where they feel like they're welcome and they belong, no matter what that space is. And that has really seemed to help with a lot of growth of the work that I've been doing. So that's something to consider.
Thank you.
Thinking about libraries as places of community, we're working on a public library in the center of Charlotte. And that library, our customer base is going to be everyone from students who are, there's already a children's library in the city, so we won't be really aiming for children, but anywhere from teenagers on up all the way through. And the library will be a place of community discourse. The idea of the library as a public commons is a theme that we're talking a lot about. So it's interesting to me to make references back and forth between campus libraries in the center of those communities and having a lot of the same concepts of places to come together to have discourse, maker spaces for people of all ages and what are they interested in, and just the back and forth. A lot of our references are to academic libraries, and Charles Library has certainly been one of them that we talk a lot about. But the idea of it being for a broader community and a, you know, in the biggest sense of the word, right? So it's just interesting the things that are working at the campus scale for bringing for making places of community. What does that mean when we broaden it out and have it? You know, our customers will also be people that have no other place to go during the day customers who need a safe space to be. So it's going to be a broad mix of people. So you want to provide services and facilities that match the customers that we have. So a lot of our discussions are about, you know, just as it was said, if we're providing something for a small percentage, is that the right group that we're targeting in terms of providing that kind of space? So interesting overlaps between academic and public libraries that are happening these days.
Thank you. I'm going to bring today's conversation to a close, and thanks so much to Henry, to Joe, to Damecia, and especially thanks to Jeannie Nairn for providing this platform for all of us.